In this update, we've got very impressive Hurricane Lee. Look at that eye, folks, as it's continued to lift northbound and actually expanding its wind field as it's making its way towards the Northeast and Nova Scotia with land impacts as early as Friday, folks. So let's expand the view and kind of show you the big picture out there in the Atlantic. That is a powerful system, folks. And look at that wind field really taking up the space here. And that's expected to continue to expand as well as it's going to be continue to lift further north, eventually heading towards the Northeast and Nova Scotia. Then we've got Margot out there into the Atlantic. That's just kind of dancing around out there. But further south is a little bit more concerning. This looks to be a formidable storm that's likely going to be named the next day or two. That looks to take kind of a similar path than what Lee looks to take as well. But further inland into the U.S., we do actually have a significant cool shot that further south down from the Great Lakes, and that impacting a good part of the country, bringing some well below average temperatures, and also for the first time in a long time, activating the subtropical jet with a more El Nino type setup with beneficial rains into the portions of the southern plains. And if you are in the market for a weather station, I highly recommend the Tempest from Weatherflow. It's actually the one I personally have had for the last 3 years. The cool thing about it is it's literally a 5-in-1 system. It's all solar. It's kind of like a set and forget it. It literally takes 10 minutes to install. You have a convenient app you can download, as well as a desktop version. You can be a part of the 55,000 that into the Tempest community now. And if you are interested, I do have a discount code. It is PALPonder10 for 10% off and free shipping. So I'll have this link right here in the description below, so you can click on it and possibly order one for yourself. And if you are new to the channel and like detailed weather breakdowns, hit the subscribe button and you're in. You get all my daily content on this channel, and I would love to reach 200,000 subscribers by the end of the month, and you can help me get there by subscribing to the channel and following all my daily content. So let's look at the big picture, because look at that, folks. That's something actually you haven't seen in a while. Some of you are already experiencing those pleasant light conditions, but that will continue to funnel southbound for several more days. And so yes, we've got 5, 6, almost 7 days of below average temperatures by the time it actually started. So a good part of the country is experiencing some like October like weather rather than the second week of September. And at the same time, we've got a pretty active subtropical jet. We're having these like pulses of energy that come across the Pacific jet stream that's running across the Four Corners regions, that's lifted up the atmosphere and wringing out some precipitation across Oklahoma and a good part of New Mexico, and definitely some welcome rains into Texas. Unfortunately, it does miss you guys up there into the Northwest. You're locked under that ridge, but further south, that's where the instability is. And then you do have that trough up here in the Great Lakes, and out ahead of it, you've got some showers and thunderstorms to contend with across the I-95 corridor and actually back into Maine. So Maine actually gets pretty pummeled over the next 7 days. So the breakdown over the next 2 days at least, there's the active subtropical jet really wringing out the precipitation. All those darker reds, that's in the form of very heavy rain could on the cusp of these impulses. There's actually going to be another one that's going to be traversing across into the wee hours of the morning tomorrow morning as well. So that could impact your morning commute down in these regions, but we are expecting some pretty healthy rains across these regions into the Panhandle, back into North Texas, especially into Central Texas, into West Texas. That feeds into Louisiana and eventually heads into portions of Mississippi and Alabama, and getting into Georgia. And yes, you have those impacts across into the Northeast, and it stays high and dry up there into the Pacific Northwest. But by Friday, you're already going to be seeing the initial outer bands of Lee coming into the picture for the Northeast. This is Friday morning. So yes, there's the dry air on the backside with those kind of gray shaded regions. That's very dry air, but there's the moist kind of humid air, and you're likely going to be experiencing those tropical force torn wind gust by as early as Friday morning up in this region with those 45 mile per hour winds. And the powerful waves. What's significant, we've got actually new moon coming up as well, so that's going to add to the high tide and the swells out here. Look at that formidable eye just off the coast of Nantucket there, right? This is kind of very rare to have a hurricane just so far north, right on the coast here, and then heading towards Maine. We're talking, yes, a hurricane heading towards the state of Maine. So that's how rare this is. And yeah, look at that, right around that center, even far as north as this, we still could be looking at some 37 feet waves out here. And closer inland, you're going to have a widespread beach erosion as well. If you live along the coast, you're definitely going to be having higher impacts from this system. And yeah, going into Friday morning, heading into Saturday, there's that storm system where it's going to be, yeah, 80-mile-per-hour hurricane, 100-mile-per-hour wind gust right off the coast of Nantucket. And then here's the latest cone from the National Hurricane Center. It's actually got Portland, Maine in the cone. It's got Bangor. It's all the way into St. John, into Halifax, into Charleston. Those are the main areas that are likely going to be impacted, from this formidable system. So it'll still be likely a Category 1 hurricane, and likely, further getting closer to minimal hurricane, or if not a very strong tropical storm by the time it makes landfall. But it does appear it's likely to make landfall within the state of Maine or into portions of Nova Scotia going into Saturday. And here's the expanded wind field on the latest NAM. So the high resolution guidance are just now coming into the picture, and it's pretty ominous, folks. I mean, that's how often you've seen something like that up here so far north as this is going to be expanding in coverage, and likely at some point it likely will turn extratropical. But it's definitely going to be expanding its wind field. So those higher wind gusts can be expanded for many miles out from the center. And this has been pretty consistent with these wind gusts. Most model data, even for the last couple of days, has still been hinting at some hurricane force wind gusts, right along the coast here, heading into, Friday, going into Saturday timeframe. So yeah, not out of the question. Inland impacts with some hurricane force wind gust right along the coast here, and then going further inland, likely into the 60-mile-per-hour range, or likely into the 50-mile-per-hour range with those heavier winds. And that'll eventually traverse across into Nova Scotia as it'll finally start to move out. But look what's left behind, folks. You've got a lot of rain to contend with that more active subtropical jet. You haven't seen that in a long time in Texas. Pretty much the entire state at least gets something out there in the form of beneficial rains, and some of those areas could get some 2 to 4 inches of rain just over the next couple of days with those multiple systems. And there's what will be Lee making impact with those heavier rains, scraping the coast into the Northeast, especially into Maine. But if we look at the big picture for the next 5 days, there's the cool front, right? That's a significant cool front for this time of year. Definitely a welcome sight. It's definitely a welcome sight of many 90 and 100-degree temperatures, and those are replaced with 80s for highs, not just 1 or 2 days, for actually multiple days down here in these regions. So this is definitely a welcome sight that you still got at least a couple more days to continue to enjoy the much more pleasant light conditions. But if we zoom out and show you the big picture, look at where Lee's come from. I mean, both Margot and Lee were both tropical waves that came off the coast of Africa. We've been literally talking about Lee for a long time, folks. We've been watching this wave coming off of Africa. It became a storm, became a Category 1, and at one point it became a Category 5 hurricane. And it was still a major hurricane, and it continues to lift, downgraded possibly to a Category 2, then likely that strong Category 1, and likely making impact as a minimal hurricane or a strong tropical storm. And then finally we can start to say goodbye to Lee, and there is Margot. But there's also another storm that's trailing behind Lee. But what typically happens with these systems, right? It takes a lot of energy. You got 2 hurricanes out there into the Atlantic. It takes a lot of energy to form these storms, and it's going to be pushing, these are going to be pushing out away from the US. So on the backside, you're typically left with a lot drier air, and they tend to alter the weather pattern. And I think that's typically what's going to happen as we extend and go into next week. So as we go into next week, there is a Margot that would be lifting out, right? And we've got this more of a kind of a zonal flow coming on off the Pacific, and the ridge lifts further north. I mean, I'm sorry, the jet stream lifts further north and allows the ridge to come in, underneath. So a lot of these areas have experienced very pleasant light conditions, 5, 10, 15 degrees below average. You're going to be completely the opposite next week with 5, 10, 15 degrees above average with the replacement of the ridge. And that's exactly what happens going into your Tuesday time frame. It becomes very evident. The coolness here is with that low pressure I showed you, it's got its own cold core pocket with it. But outside of that, it doesn't expand. I mean, you got the ridge pretty much dominating a good part of the country. We're not talking hundreds again or anything like that, but still 90s could likely be unfolding, and 80s further north, well above average for this time of year. And that's exactly what's going to unfold, especially starting in the middle of the week. But look what happens, right? That's that other system that's trailing behind Lee, that's not yet a storm, that will likely be a storm and probably take the name Nigel out here. And look at the eye. I mean, it's almost like deja vu. I mean, there's Carolina, there's the storm. That's basically where Lee is right now. So we could be looking at another possibly formidable storm right here in kind of the same area that Lee was. So we'll be kind of doing this all over again, tracking this system. But I think there's subtle differences between what Lee and what this system will bring, because we've got the ridge in place, right? So typically we had that trough and the ridge was on the backside, going to be pushing Lee inland. And that's exactly, I think, what's going to happen. Well, there's not much strong ridging on the backside of this system going into next week. So we have the ridging on the front side. So that actually acts as a blocking mechanism towards the US and will actually keep this system well away from the US. And that's likely going to happen because this ridge is just going to be so dominant heading into next week. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video. Definitely hit the subscribe button and catch me next update. Fire protect you before and after storm.